Good morning again. Director General Valovaya, President Vike-Freiberga, Dr. Serageldin, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct privilege to be tasked with the daunting role of moderating the opening session of this most high-profile and high-level two-day conference on the key challenges facing us today. This is the first time the United Nations Office at Geneva has had the pleasure of co-hosting a conference of such magnitude jointly with the internationally renowned and widely respected Nizami Ganjavi International Center based in Baku, Azerbaijan. This is a special year for both co-hosts. Our partner is marking the 880th anniversary of its eponym, Nizami Ganjavi, foremost poet, philosopher, thinker, and humanist of his day. And the United Nations is marking the 75th anniversary of its first session of the UN General Assembly, a date coming on the heels of last year's commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the organization and of a century of multilateralism, modern multilateralism that was born right here on these beautiful shores of Lake Leman. It is a particular pleasure to be part of this conference, which we are conducting in hybrid format, signaling a reawakening and a rebirth of international intellectual and diplomatic activity after a long, dry spell. The pandemic that rocked the world on its axis last year is one of the most acute challenges to international cooperation since World War II. It's not only a global health emergency, it also entails a human crisis, a financial black hole, and from an economic recession for the wealthiest to an outright disaster for the less fortunate among the world's countries. And yet, as bad as the situation is, it could be argued that if the pandemic had happened in an otherwise orderly world, its impact would likely not have been as staggering. The world's current crisis is defined by the pre-existing risks, or in pandemic speak, pre-existing conditions that are amplified by COVID-19. We have a very impressive lineup of political leaders, thought leaders, civic society leaders who have come together for the 2 days, whether physically traveling to Geneva, for which I thank them, or joining us virtually to tackle these and the myriad related problems and challenges facing the world today. So I will resist the temptation of a moderator to share at length his or her views on the issues at hand, thus preempting the presentation of the speakers and using up the time that is theirs to present their views and enlighten us. This could also be detrimental to one's professional health when the first speaker is your own boss. And so it is with the greatest of pleasure that I kick off the conference by inviting the Director General of the United Nations Office at Geneva, UN Undersecretary General, Ms. Tatiana Valovaya, to address the conference. Director General, the floor is yours.
Yes, perfect. Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. A warm welcome in person and virtually to the Palais des Nations in Geneva. As you can see, we're in a temporary building, which is called Tempus, which building we are using during the period when our Palais des Nations is undergoing strategic renovation. And I'm really hopeful that once the pandemic goes to end, our reconstruction goes to end. We'll be very happy to welcome all of you in person in the historical Palais des Nations, a place where international organizations, governments, civil society, academia, and private sector closely collaborate, where diverse expertise from all fields is gathered and consolidated, and where ideas flourish and are put into action. It is an immense pleasure to co-host such a high-profile event, which brings together the collective wisdom of over 30 prominent world leaders and high-level UN personalities. Over the next 2 days, speakers will exchange ideas and perspectives on many challenges we are facing today and engage with a global virtual audience. I would like to sincerely thank our esteemed co-host, the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, for the excellent collaboration, and personally its co-chairs, Her Excellency Ms. Vaira Vike-Freiberga and Dr. Ismail Serageldin, its founding Secretary General, Mr. Ravshan Muradov, as well as their very competent and professional team. I would also like to commend the Center for its outstanding work and wish it further success as it marks its 9th anniversary precisely at the present time. Peace, diversity, and common humanity remain the guiding concepts of United Nations work and continue to be the core values of the United Nations Office at Geneva. This event is a timely opportunity to reflect on the state of the planet today. The world has never been more threatened or divided. We face the greatest cascade of crises in our lifetimes, confronted with armed conflicts, growing geopolitical tensions, an unsustainable economic and social order, stark inequalities, and a looming climate emergency. Human rights and freedoms are being violated, while a surge of mistrust among nations is polarizing people and paralyzing societies. A more inclusive and networked multilateral response to tackle these global challenges in a post-COVID world is imperative. During the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the Secretary General called on the international community to strengthen and accelerate multilateral cooperation towards achieving the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This call is also a guiding principle in his report, Our Common Agenda, released last month. Cooperation with civil society is a central pillar in this vision for a more inclusive and networked multilateralism. And this event is one of many examples of the strong partnership between the United Nations and civil society. Today and tomorrow, the urgent need for a multilateralism mindset will be emphasized and elaborated on. In 4 panels, the following priority areas will be discussed. Maintenance of peace and security in a deteriorating world. We must further bolster our system of international law and cooperation and strive to put an end to armed conflicts around the world. The promotion of cultural diversity, which is the very foundation of global cooperation and fundamental to the activities of the United Nations. The climate emergency. The Paris Agreement target is still within reach, but we need faster, more effective climate governance. COP26 in Glasgow later this month will be a vital forum to accelerate climate action. Finally, gender equality. Achieving equal rights and opportunities for women and girls is the single most effective measure we can take to create more stable, peaceful, resilient, and prosperous communities and societies. Over the next 2 days, our distinguished speakers will provide us with their unique perspectives, experiences, and invaluable inputs with the aim to inspire solutions to these pressing global challenges. Today's high-level meeting comes at an ideal time. I look forward to the inspiring speeches and contributions to be presented in the next panels, as well as to an active engagement with our online audience through the Zoom chat box provided for this event. To paraphrase Nizami Ganjavi, the world is for joy and happiness, not for oppression and poverty. On this 880th anniversary of his birth, let us be inspired by the words and ideas of this great 12th century thinker, whose literary works illustrate the beauty of humanity and the harmony of the universe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General. It is now my particular privilege to invite the co-chairs of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, former President of Latvia, Her Excellency Ms. Vaira Vike-Freiberga, and Dr. Ismail Serageldin, former Vice President of the World Bank, to address the conference, but ladies first. Madam President, the floor is yours.
So Moderator, Madam Valovaya, Director General of the United Nations in Geneva, my dear co-chair Ismail Serageldin, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be participating with the United Nations in Geneva in this important conference, which follows on the heels of the General Assembly, which we just had in New York. Nizami Ganjavi, 880 years ago, when he was born into a world that was full of strife and conflict and injustices, too many and numerous to name, miraculously grew up into a wise man, a Hakim, who, while a faithful follower of Islam, never went into the extremes and the absurdities of the interpretation of the holy book of his religion that we see to this day in contemporary Afghanistan and in other places in the world. 880 years ago, we had ideals, we had principles about the beauty of nature, about the uniqueness of the human condition, about the talents and possibilities that women possessed as well as men, that are extraordinarily modern. And in some sense, we can say, well, yes, in the nearly 1,000 years since, we have indeed approached some of these ideas, these basic concepts have become ours, but in some places not. And in that sense, we are left with a conundrum, with a dilemma. Is the world progressing? Is it retrogressing? Is it just standing in place? That's a philosophical question, but surely we must keep in mind that the three alternatives have always been there. And any progress that has been made by humanity has been achieved by really bright and original minds coming up with concepts that seem strange and unusual to their contemporaries, but that slowly gained acceptance, that spread at least among certain classes of society, and that after long and painful struggles, ultimately ended up in the modern societies of our current age, where we feel that the human condition is as humane as currently with our abilities and our resources we're able to make it. At the same time, we realize that even in the richest, the most developed, the most progressive, the most exemplary of countries, of those making up the United Nations, we have difficult problems that remain unresolved. We have retrogression in terms of internal security, stability, political consensus about the directions in which the country could go. And the bisections, the divisions in society become very visible when we see the voting results in many countries. In so many countries, you have the left and the right, or various other divisions, tribal divisions, or what have you, showing that the diversity that is, if you like, one of the richest, one of the most valuable inheritances that we possess as societies, as humans who can share our experience and transmit it to future generations, not starting from scratch each generation anew, we are having a difficulty in applying them in practice. The planet itself seems to be angry at us. Lava is spewing in the Canary Islands, changing the landscape and leaving people homeless and jobless. In a country like Chile, which has gone through difficult times in order to reach a democracy, We see demonstrations in the street against immigrants trying to get in from Venezuela. They themselves, who suffered from a right-wing dictatorship in Chile, are marching in the streets to protest the coming in of refugees from a totally dysfunctional left-wing government in Venezuela, because they say, we would like to keep our country the way it is, and we do not need and do not wish to have any inputs that are potentially destabilizing to our country. As a child refugee of the Second World War, I sympathize with all the refugees that continue to be flowing out of their countries and fleeing unbearable conditions and trying to find shelter and solace and protection somewhere else, and do not always find open doors and open arms in receiving them. But after the Second World War, when I was a child, we did have already the United Nations that had started to have programs for refugees. And I would not be sitting here today talking to you from Kurzeme in Latvia if I had not received as a child the food rations that were distributed to the refugees from the countries overrun by communism and by the Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War. Everywhere I look in the world, we have conflicts between different interests on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have helping hands reaching out, warm hearts opening to those in need and working for their benefit. And this balance between rejecting and accepting, between despair and hope, between depression and some sort of conviction that yes, we can do something about our common future and about our common present. The divisions that we see are the most amazing. The idea that population should be split up about the need or not of getting vaccinated against a hugely contagious disease and making a political issue of it, and really violently protesting against simply public health measures that are meant to protect everybody and reduce the rampages and the damages done by the pandemic are extraordinary. But the divisions continue between men and women and the prejudice against women. When we see these lumps of rags that are barely allowed to show themselves on the streets of Kabul, we realize to what extent women are dehumanized. They are not treated as human beings, never mind as second-class citizens. They are not citizens, they are not human beings. There's some kind of things used for what? Procreation, occasional pleasure, nothing else, with no rights of their own. We see then again young people marching and telling us in high tones and very emphatically that they resent the older generation for having made a mess of the world as it is today, having enjoyed all the benefits of their lifetime, and then leaving this inheritance of a polluted and climate perturbed world to the younger generation. Well, may I remind you that the generations that we have keep succeeding each other in a continuous flow. We all stand on this moving sidewalk that is the passing of time. And the child of today will be the adolescent of tomorrow, and the adolescent will become the adult, and the adult will become the old age person. And that the wrongs and the rights done to the world really do not bear so much the tag of succeeding generations, but rather the tag of how constructive, how useful, how inspiring they can be. Ladies and gentlemen, in this session, we will be approaching from various angles the problems that face the world today. And we'll be hearing from leaders and from also academics, diplomats, the staff and specialists who work for the United Nations, their ideas and their suggestions for what needs to be done, what the diagnosis is of our current world, and yes, what is our hope for tomorrow. I wish everybody in this conference a most interesting dialogue on matters that concern us all very deeply. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It is now my great pleasure to invite Dr. Ismail Serageldin to address the opening session. Dr. Serageldin, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the members of the Nizami Ganjavi International Center, I'm proud to be here metaphorically under the roof of the United Nations office in Geneva, hopefully at the main building on another occasion. But it is great to be here with you, to reflect on the pursuit of peace and justice, on human dignity, freedom, and equality, on the celebration of our diversity within our common humanity, and to promote the adoption of the path to sustainability as exemplified by the Sustainable Development Goals. Today, we look at the risks of mounting nationalism and extremism of the worst kind, and it is important that we do not lose sight of our priorities, but in fact encourage multilateralism through the UN framework. The UN is the institution that represents these global values, both in its charter and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in subsequent agencies that it has created, and which encourages all nations to collaborate actively to achieve a global response to all the challenges, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic we are living through, and to build a post-COVID-19 world while pursuing a sustainable development path. So today, when we meet here and the auspices of the UN Geneva office, we salute the lofty aims of humanity that the UN represents and the efforts of the UN to mobilize all nations and all people to pursue these lofty goals while pursuing a better life for all, and to do so in a sustainable and fair fashion within a framework of peace that excludes reliance on conflicts. It is not going to be easy, for we were warned that we already see examples of voices that polarize people and paralyze societies, but we shall overcome them. So for us of the NGIC, on this special year of Nizami's celebrations, the 880th anniversary of his birth in Ganja, we find thoughtful echoes of his values in these worthy goals. The goals that the UN has helped crystallize for all of humanity through its charter, through its Universal Declaration of Human Rights and its special agencies, and most recently, the Sustainable Development Goals, with their emphasis on fighting poverty, promoting freedom and equality, and nurturing our environment. Indeed, I hope and I know that some of my colleagues will much more forcefully address the overarching issue of climate change as we proceed. And so, my friends, this opening session simply lays the foundation for the discussions that follow. The state of our world is characterized by complex, interconnected global challenges that confront our common humanity with an approaching ecological catastrophe, an unsustainable economic and social order, and stark inequalities, growing mistrust, geopolitical tensions, and much more. The meeting that we are about to undertake looks at this unsettled world landscape that is emerging before our eyes, but to inspire us to work together, to discuss achievements and current challenges and possible way outs of the multiple crises. And I look forward to our creative discussions in the coming sessions, for I know that the way forward is possible. In fact, it can be done, and it must be done. And with everybody's goodwill, it will be done. Thank you.
Dr. Serageldin, thank you very much for your remarks. We are in the real UN, actually, not metaphorically. The UN is multifaceted in not only in the politics, but also in real estate. So this is a temporary building, and we're happy to have it. Otherwise, we would not have been able to function. We're at lower than 50% of our conference rooms that are functioning. We're very privileged to have with us today one of the most prominent human rights advocates on the international scene, Ms. Kerry Kennedy, president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights and daughter of the slain former Attorney General of the United States of America. Ms. Kennedy is joining us live, and I sincerely hope that she is somewhere on this side of the Atlantic. Otherwise, it is really early in the United States. Ms. Kennedy, we're very grateful that you are with us this morning, and I'm very pleased to give you the floor.
There we go. Can you hear me? Good. So I'm speaking to you from Hyannisport, Massachusetts, and it is very early here. Albert Camus said, perhaps this will always be a world in which children suffer, but we can reduce the number of suffering children. Today is about working together to create a more just and peaceful world, and that must include addressing the suffering of children. COVID-19 and the economic aftershocks have already resulted in the first rise in child labor, trafficking, and slavery in decades. We cannot have this happen during the United Nations International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Every day, 160 million children are forced to work rather than go to school, an increase of more than 8 million in the last 4 years alone. That is more than all the children in the United States and Canada combined. These children suffer from malnutrition and have the least access.
Line back on.
Of child labor are tackled. Almost every country in the world has legislation against child labor, but this has not been supported by the resources to tackle underlying poverty. Together, we must put in place a safety net for the most vulnerable children on Earth. Together, we can work with governments to end child labor by delivering financial resources, public policies, and social protection for the most marginalized children and families, families who have often faced generations of discrimination. We cannot achieve racial and economic justice. We cannot achieve the SDGs without protecting every child. The good news is the solution is within our reach. If we combine forces of the United Nations, international organizations, governments, NGOs, and the private sector. Today, 75 of the world's largest economies are actually multinational corporations, giving them a special role in ending supply chains which abuse children. For instance, 1,560,000 children work in the chocolate industry, 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, instead of attending school, to produce sweets for Europe and the United States, where up to 70% of the chocolate consumed in our countries is produced by child labor. Surely, the largest investors in the chocolate industry can use their influence to stop the abuse. Governments can make universal education a reality so that the 258 million children aged 6 to 11 who are now out of school over half of whom are girls, have a decent education. Governments must protect the rights of all their citizens and assure education is free, available, proximate, and of decent quality. Law enforcement can free the 10 million children around the world abused through adult prostitution, trafficking, and pornography, the vast majority of whom are girls. The international community must stop the devastating impact of war on children, war which today impacts over 400 million children living in conflict zones or countries at war. Those at this conference today might not wake up in the morning and feel like we have a lot of power, but compared to these children, we do. We must be steadfast in our resolve and use our voice to globalize compassion and create a just and peaceful world. We demand a fair share for all children. Charity. Our collective 20% charity in India for the march started at the site of Gandhi's cremation. And there etched in stone was a quote from the Mahatma. It read, "If you are wondering what to do in life, call to mind the face of the poorest person you have ever met. And if your next step helps relieve that person's suffering, you will walk pure and straight and true." All of us here today and over the next few days, in person or virtually, can join together to abolish the scourge of child labor and so walk together straight and true. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you for your effort to join us from Hyannisport at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is tantamount probably or even more important than flying across the Atlantic. Both are very much appreciated. It is an honor to inform you that that His Excellency Mr. Šefik Džaferović, member of the Presidency of Bosnia-Herzegovina, has addressed the video message to our conference, and I ask colleagues to please play the message.
Poštovane dame i gospodo, zahvaljujem Uredu Ujedinjenih nacija u Ženevi kao i Međunarodnom centru Nizami Ganjavi na pozivu da učestvujem na ovom sastanku visokog nivoa posvećenom jako važnim temama kao što su izgradnja mira i sigurnosti, upravljanje različitostima, klimatski izazovi i održivi razvoj. Ključna činjenica od koje polazimo jeste da živimo u vremenu velikih globalnih gibanja. Današnji svijet nalazi se u stanju koje se ne može opisati naslijeđenim definicijama hladnoratovske ere ili unipolarnog svijeta s kraja prošlog i početka ovog stoljeća. Da bismo razumjeli današnji svijet u njegovom jedinstvenom stanju, potreban nam je jedinstven set pojmova. Kada govorimo o miru i sigurnosti u uvjetima savremenog svijeta koji se ubrzano mijenja, važno je imati na umu dvije stvari. Prvo, po prvi put u modernoj historiji postoje značajni dijelovi svijeta u kojima najveći dio stanovništva, čak i starije dobi, na sreću, nije iskusio rat u svom životnom vijeku. Konkretno, unutar granica Europske unije već duže od 7 decenija društveni sukobi ne razrješavaju se oružanom silom, već dijalogom i demokratskim mehanizmima. U urnoj europskoj historiji, prepunoj ratova, ova činjenica ukazuje na izvjesnu promjenu paradigme. S druge strane, u neposrednim susjedstvima mirnih i stabilnih regija poput Europske unije još uvijek bujaju krizna žarišta u kojima milioni ljudskih bića strahuju za svoje živote pred postojećim ili potencijalnim ratovima. Kao nikada u svojoj historiji svijet nije bio svjesniji važnosti mira i rješavanja problema dijalogom, a opet čini se da je svijet bespomoćan pred borbama za vlast i teritoriju. Brojni sukobi u različitim dijelovima svijeta svjedoče o ovoj zastrašujućoj istini. Čovječanstvo još uvijek nije u stanju zaštititi svoje članove od svog najstrašnijeg izuma, rata. U razmatranju navedenog stanja rješenje nije ni u reduktivnom sagledavanju stvari. Istina je da je nakon osnivanja Ujedinjenih nacija čovječanstvo izbjeglo doživjeti novi svjetski ili nuklearni rat, ponavljanje zločina, razmjena holokausta ili ekonomske krize kakva je bila Velika depresija. Istina je međutim da su brojni regionalni i međudržavni ratovi pokazali svu krhkost globalnog sigurnosnog sistema, da se genocid ponovio između ostalog i na tlu moje države, potkopavši kredibilitet onog čuvenog nikada više, kao i da svijet periodično pogađaju ekonomske krize sa devastirajućim efektima. Činjenica da pandemija koronavirusa nije ni približno pogubna kao svojevremeno španska groznica ne predstavlja nikakvu utjehu onima koji svakodnevno gube svoje najmilije. Statističke činjenice o iskorjenjivanju siromaštva neće nahraniti preostale gladne. Kako se postaviti pred izazovima budućnosti ako znamo da pošasti nisu samo stvar prošlosti, već i sadašnjosti, pa i budućnosti čovječanstva? Da li imamo pravo zaključiti da historija uopće napreduje prema pozitivnom cilju, ukoliko periodična ponavljanja ratova, ekonomskih kriza i pandemija ukazuju na izvjesnu cikličnost u historijskom kretanju? Duboko sam uvjeren da je zadaća svake generacije da pomjeri jednu stepenicu naprijed. Nijednoj generaciji nije dato da ukloni svo nasilje i nepravdu, ali svaka ima obavezu da nadograđuje dostignuća prethodnih u navedenom smislu. Svaki put kada se ratovi, nasilja, zaraze ili druge pošasti ponove i odnesu brojne ljudske živote, prirodno je što se budi ogorčenje. Ipak ono ne treba da se pretvori u pesimistično odustajanje od borbe za slobodu, pravdu i dostojanstvo čovjeka kao univerzalne ciljeve čovječanstva koji daju duboki smisao našim nastojanjima. U potpunosti dijelim mišljenje generalnog sekretara Ujedinjenih nacija koji je u našoj zajedničkoj agendi podcrtao da fundamentalne vrijednosti Povelje Ujedinjenih nacija nisu odraz uvjerenja žitelja jednog geografskog područja, već su zasnovane u svim kulturama i religijama. Mir, pravda, dostojanstvo, jednakost, tolerancija i solidarnost nisu izum čovjeka jednog vremena ili podneblja, već svakog vremena i svakog podneblja. Pitanje je samo mehanizama pomoću kojih ćemo ostvariti vladavinu ovih vrijednosti. Po mom dubokom uvjerenju, ključni mehanizam je znanje i obrazovanje. Činjenice govore da je upravo masovno obrazovanje dalo najveći doprinos pacifizaciji i demokratizaciji ljudskih društava. Činjenice govore da su zahvaljujući naučnom znanju ljudi osvijestili i učinili predvidivim brojne ekonomske i druge procese koji su ih ranije pogađali posve neočekivano. Na koncu, zahvaljujući naučnom znanju i njegovoj masovnoj primjeni, čovječanstvo je kadro da se brani i od tekuće pandemije. Znanje i obrazovanje su jedan od ključnih odgovora i na druge velike izazove savremenog svijeta, kao što su klimatske promjene i upravljanje različitostima. Samo poštivanje naučnih saznanja i svijest o kobnim posljedicama klimatskih promjena može pokrenuti kolektivnu akciju. Samo obrazovanje širi vidik čovjeku i pomaže mu da razumije međuzavisnost svijeta i činjenicu da je politička kriza, glad ili povećanje temperature na drugom kraju svijeta stvar koja se tiče svih nas, jer sutra može postati problem u vidu izbjeglica i migranata u našem dvorištu. Samo upoznavanje drugih kultura i naučna relativizacija stereotipa kao anahronih i reduktivnih oblika saznanja može pomoći ljudima da grade miroljubiva multikulturalna društva i upravljaju različitostima, oslobađajući se tereta diskriminacije koji onemogućava ljude da realiziraju svoje pune potencijale. Znanje o kulturi drugih predstavlja strukturalnu empatiju koja nije nikakav luksuz ni hobi, već egzistencijalna potreba savremenog čovjeka. Rekao bih čak da je nepoznavanje drugih kultura sa kojima dijelite životni prostor, nepismenost 21. stoljeća. U navedenom kontekstu dopustite mi da podcrtam još jednu jako važnu tezu generalnog sekretara UN-a, a iz naše zajedničke agende. Solidarnost nije milostinja. U ovako međupovezanom svijetu ona je izraz zdravog razuma. Ona je priznavanje činjenice da smo upućeni jedni na druge i da više niko sam ne može rješavati svoje izazove. U tom smislu na ovom mjestu plediram za multilateralnu saradnju, kolektivnu akciju i globalnu solidarnost kao jedine autentične načine rješavanja naših zajedničkih izazova. Nije pitanje da li će se svijet u kojem živimo mijenjati ili neće. Promjene su izvjesne. Pitanje je samo da li ćemo mi utjecati na te promjene ili ćemo samo nijemo posmatrati. Naša obaveza je da udružimo naše snage kako bismo ispunili svoj zadatak i dali doprinos u historijskom hodu čovječanstva prema univerzalnom miru i slobodi. Hvala vam na pažnji.
Allow me to extend our collective appreciation to His Excellency for this message by which he honored our conference. The last, but by no means least, speaker to address the opening session is the permanent representative of Azerbaijan to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, Ambassador Galib Israfilov. Mr. Ambassador, it's a privilege to invite you to address the opening session.
Thank you. I hope I'm heard loud and clear. Dear Madam Director General Valovaya, dear co-chairs of Nizami Ganjavi International Center, President Vike-Freiberga and Dr. Serageldin, distinguished Ms. Kennedy and member of Presidency, Mr. Džaferović, and ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted and honored to participate in this high-level event on peace, diversity, and our common humanity. And I wish to express my sincere gratitude to Director General Valovaya for supporting the idea of convening such an important and timely dialogue jointly with the Nizami Ganjavi International Center. Holding the event is a vivid recognition of a strong partnership that UN office in Geneva has been developing with non-governmental sector and of the crucial role played by civil society in addressing global challenges through multilateral cooperation. 2021 has been announced by President of Azerbaijan as a year of Nizami Ganjavi and will be celebrated as his 880th anniversary of birth. The Nizami Ganjavi International Center in a short time span has become one of the leading platforms for promoting diversity, peace, and mutual understanding. Such a vast concentration of world politicians who possess rich experience and knowledge has a unique chance to offer valuable advice and promote the ingenious legacy of Nizami Ganjavi for the benefits of humanity. So dear dignitaries, welcome to multicultural Geneva, the heart of multilateralism. And I hope that your visit and meetings here would further contribute to growing international recognition of the hard and important work that the center is carrying out, and to expanding your cooperation with Geneva-based international organizations, including for addressing the challenges facing our part of the world. Excellencies, our meeting is held almost 1 year after the drastic changes had taken place in the Southern Caucasus, which have put an end to the conflict and more than 3 decades long injustice committed against our nation. Azerbaijan informs the implementation of UN Security Council resolutions, restored territorial integrity, ensured that almost 1 million of the refugees and IDPs can exercise the right to return in safety and dignity to their places of origin, and offered a new strategic vision for transformation of the region, jointly with the partner countries. The main lessons drawn from this situation are that the protagonist of nationalism and territorial claims, due to false assumptions, miscalculations, and heavy reliance on the conflict and external powers, lost so much time and benefits of regional development and prosperity that now the challenging reality they face is much worse than it was when they regained the independence in the beginning of 90s. I wish to hope that lessons learned will be used to rectify mistakes of the past, get rid of self-deception, and pursue a more friendly, good neighborly policy in the region. Decision makers will have to soberly examine the evolving regional security environment and confront the ideas of revanchism and hatred, as we believe there is no alternative to advancing the values of peace and diversity in our region. Azerbaijan encourages the international community to help the region to overcome animosity of the past and extend its unequivocal support to the efforts leave the conflict in history. It is extremely important for the world leaders and United Nations to send politically correct messages to countries of the region and to assist in launching confidence-building measures aimed at consolidating fragile peace, reviving life in the liberated territories, and establishing the basis for regional economic interaction. Azerbaijan embarked upon large-scale demining, reconstruction, and rehabilitation activities in these territories based on our resources. We invite partner countries and relevant international institutions to extend their assistance to Azerbaijan. In line with trilateral statement, we supported the initiatives on opening the communications and transportation corridors. We believe that it will provide new opportunities for trade and regional connectivity for all countries of the region. Azerbaijan is inviting the United Nations, its specialized agencies, and international partners to help us with rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reintegration activities in the liberated territories. Newly created realities by Azerbaijan has to be properly assessed and taken into account both by governments and academic circles. Promoting series of intellectual debates shall encourage the questioning of predominant ideologies prevailing in some capitals on how UN and multilateral institutions have to settle conflicts and administer justice. Azerbaijan will gladly share its experience of facing political and cultural biases that preventing the mediating formats from implementing UN Security Council resolutions or employing alternative methods such as sanctions against the occupying power. We suspect that such broad-level discussions could trigger new thinking and new agenda for the region, free from narrative of the past and conducive to stability and regional cooperation. We believe that our region suffered a lot and it deserves a better future, free of conflicts and dividing lines. In closing, I would like to thank once again the UN office in Geneva and Nizami Ganjavi International Center for inviting me to opening session and to wish the high-level panel interesting deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Well, this brings us to the end of the opening session, and I'm pleased to note that together with the speakers, we managed to bring this train to the station on time, even ahead of time, which is important for the forthcoming timing of the panels. Allow me to once again, this time collectively, thank our outstanding opening speakers. And with this, I hand the baton over to Mrs. Katerina Yushchenko, former First Lady of Ukraine, who will moderate panel 1 on peace and security in a changing world. And we cede the podium to the participants of panel 1. Thank you.